Now I'm going to show you a different way of accomplishing the same workload that's going to be more efficient. And this technique is known as using Pilate jobs. So we're still going to have a workflow down here that we want to execute. And it may have a large number of relatively small jobs. And we're still going to use a workflow management system in order to execute the jobs. Now the difference is we're not going to submit the jobs directly to the batch system in the cluster. Instead, we're going to introduce a new component. And this new component is known as a Pilate job factory. Now what a Pilate job factory does is it talks to our batch system. And it's going to submit Pilate jobs for a given user into the batch queue. So I'll write those out as PA for Pilate for user A. So there could be quite a lot of these. Now, anytime we submit things to a batch system, we know we may have to wait for them to be scheduled. So perhaps there's some other users over here. We may have to wait for a while. But eventually, these Pilate jobs are going to be scheduled onto the cluster. So I'll mark them here. Now, I haven't explained what a Pilate job is. A Pilate job is a simple application that is going to run on the cluster. And it doesn't run a job directly, but instead what it does is it calls home to the workflow manager and indicates that it's available to run the job that you actually want to run. So each of these Pilate jobs will call home to our workflow management system. And now the workflow management system is going to look at its workflow and then decide which task needs to run next, and then send that task not to the batch system, but to the Pilate job. So each task that needs to run will get sent out to one of these Pilate jobs here. Here's task 1, and task 2, and task 3. Now these Pilate jobs here end up being a sort of mini cluster that can be harnessed by this workflow management system. Whenever a task completes, the Pilate job will send it back to the workflow management system, who will make a note of it here, and then send the next task over. So perhaps task 4 runs here, and then after a while, task 5 and task 6. And those complete again, the results come back, the workflow management system dispatches some more, and we have task 7, task 8, and 9. Eventually, the workflow management system will be out of work, so it stops sending the tasks and tells these pilots to shut down. So they go away. The batch system notices, oh, those pilots are gone, and removes them from the system, and we're all done. Now, how is this better from direct job execution? It's better in several ways. The first is that our Pilate jobs only wait in the batch queue once. They might have to wait a long time for their turn, but once they get their turn, they start executing. And then once they start executing, they're able to run multiple tasks from the workflow management system. And each time a task is done, it goes back, and the workflow management can immediately start one and keep things going. We don't have to go back to the batch queue and wait over and over again. So this means we can dispatch jobs with an overhead of maybe 1 second. And that's a whole lot better than the 30-second rule that we talked about before. Another way in which this is better is that these Pilate jobs, because they form sort of a mini cluster, they give us a place where we can manage data for our own purposes in that cluster. So each one of these Pilate jobs can have their own little cache where we can place data. And now tasks that require the same data don't have to keep transferring it into the cluster multiple times. The third benefit here is that the workflow management system now has better scheduling control over which jobs run next. When the workflow management system submitted directly into the batch queue, the batch system got to make its own choices about which task would run first, and you could never predict what was going to happen. But now we use Pilate jobs to get resources from the batch system, and now the workflow management system has direct control over which task runs next. Now, I'll be honest, the first time many people see this, they say, It seems like cheating to me. I think you're getting ahead of line in front of other people. And if you think about it for a while, it turns out there's nothing really wrong with it. All we're doing is making sure that we do as much work as possible within the context of one pilot job. And so what you'll often see with large cluster systems is that the basic batch system is used not to run jobs directly, but every user will submit pilot jobs to see how many nodes they can get, and then schedule those knobs to their own purposes. So in this particular cluster, maybe we have 3 more nodes here running pilot jobs for user B, who's running a completely different workload. And we could have pilot jobs for user C, who's running yet a 3rd workload. Each of those users will get an amount of resources controlled by the system administrators, so that's okay. And in addition, each user will have their own freedom to schedule jobs exactly how they like within the context of their workflow management system. So that's the principle of pilot jobs.